we'll be looking at approaches to community-led liturgy, and they'll be inspired by what Pope Francis has been saying all along about mission. So the document speaks about Jesus, the crowd, and the crew. And the crew were the disciples, the apostles, but their job was to help Jesus to reach the crowd. His focus was on the crowd, and that image there of the boat and the people gathered on the shores, I think, it captures that sense that Francis expressed in the initial document from the synod. So who are the crew and the crowd today? So we might move on, Francis, just to the next image. I found this a useful one for trying to get a handle on how we're fixed today as parishes. And there's four groups. In the center, the C group, then the B group, and around them the A group, and then the N group. So what are they all about? Well, the C group are the people today who are in one way or another promoting the mission of Jesus, people involved in ministry. Traditionally, they were the priests and religious. They're getting fewer today, but there's a whole lot of other folk. Like that recent mapping exercise that was done in the diocese show that there's at least 700 groups of lay people involved in various ministries across the diocese, supporting the work of the church locally, at least 700. On top of those, say you have the priests, you have the religious, you have deacons, you have the lay ministers that were recently appointed. So you have quite a number of people who are, if you like, crews on the boat. And then around them, you have the B group. The B group are the regular mass goers. They're like the boat siders in the image. They're close to the shore. They're regular attenders at the parish liturgies. And then outside them again, you have the A group. And the A group are further away. They're more distant. They're occasional attenders, like at weddings and funerals and Christmas and so on. They're a bit more cagey than the B group. They're a bit like Zacchaeus up on the tree, having a look to see whether he'll go or not. But Pope Francis has been very clear that the parish is made up of all three, the A group, the B group, and the C group. And that as church, the A group, the B group, and the C group exist together in a wider community of neighbours. And those are people of no religion, people of different religions. But that's Pope Francis's vision, and that we are seeking all together, the A's, the B's, the C's, and the wider group. We are seeking to build civilization of love. Now, there's a Father Halleck, Father Thomas Halleck, who has worked with three popes, Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict, and Pope Francis, and he's reflected a good bit on Francis's message. And he would say that faith is the space we make for God's life in us. And that in any human being, faith can be conscious or unconscious. And he's saying that the key indicator, the key way we know whether or not somebody is responding to God's presence in them is whether or not there's love in their lives. It's not so much what we say as what we do. So I suppose the key point he's making there, which Francis would certainly support, is we should not be sitting in judgment. Like if we're belonging to the C group, we should not be sitting in judgment around the B's, the A's, or the N's. That God is present in all people's lives. And our focus tonight on rituals is an important focus in that our rituals are towards celebrating God's presence in our lives. And the thing about rituals, certainly in the Irish context, is that they reach the crowd. They reach beyond the immediate B group, the immediate group of mass goers. They reach beyond the C group of the very committed. They reach into the A's, and sometimes they reach into the N's. And a key question for us is, as we have fewer priests in our parishes, is it possible that our rituals can be sustained by lay people? And that's what we're going to focus on tonight. Francis is going to chat for a while just on the broad resources that are available and approach to using those resources. And then Patricia is going to come in with a story of a particular lay-led ritual in her own parish. So Francis, I'll pass on to you.
So what I want to look at tonight is three aspects of community-led prayer. First of all, what is community prayer? Secondly, who may lead the community prayer? And then what are the possible occasions that we might have for community prayer? So you hear, if you're in your parish pastoral council, maybe you're on your liturgy group, maybe you're aware of moments in the life of your community when there has been a need for prayer, but perhaps Father hasn't been available. And you're conscious that into the future, the priest will not be available. That's what we're looking at tonight. So what's possible and how might we go about it? So we might just begin and look at what is community prayer. And it's something we're all very familiar with. It's really the prayer of the people of faith gathered together. So when we gather as a community, whether it's at a funeral, at a wedding, at Mass on a Sunday, for a special occasion, when we gather as a community and we gather as a people of faith, we are praying together, and that's the prayer that we want to continue happening in the life of our parishes. So it's the prayer of us as people, parishioners, people of faith, people in the A, B, and C groups that Martin mentioned. It's the priest present. That's the prayer of the people. But the prayer of the people has two focuses. One is that we give thanks to God. We speak to God. We speak to Jesus Christ. We call on the Spirit to lead us in something. And the second thing is that we gain strength and confidence and comfort from one another when we pray together. So all of us are familiar with our own individual prayer at home, but there's something that happens when we gather in a community. So if I'm in a place of maybe struggle, whether I'm finding life difficult, I'm finding God far from me, when we gather as a community, I rely on and I depend on the faith and the prayer of other people. Similarly, there are times when I am very conscious of the place that God holds in my life and the way in which God is speaking and working through me. And somebody else might be depending on my witness to prayer. And when we come together, it's not just individual prayers, it's what we do as a group. So there's a strength beyond the individual prayer. And the prayer that we might be most familiar with, the prayer of the Mass on a Sunday, it says that one of the presences of Christ in that group is in the community gathered. So anytime we gather as a community, where two or three are gathered in my name, there am I in your midst. Christ is present among us. So that's the community prayer that we're talking about. And by praying together as a community, we become a praying community. We do it and we become it. We become it by doing it. So if into the future, as we know, we will have fewer priests, if we lose that art and that way of praying together, we will lose ourselves as praying people, as communities of faith. I mentioned there to you the examples, one that you'll be very familiar with, the Mass, the celebration of the sacraments. They're all moments when we pray as a community. The liturgy of the hours, you might be, if you've ever been in Glenstall or Glencairn or Mount Mellery, you'd have heard the office prayed by the monks, but it's also prayed by the religious and the priests throughout the country. The liturgy of the word, Sometimes some of you might have been familiar with where we've just prayed with the liturgy of the word and we haven't moved into the liturgy of the Eucharist. That it in itself is nourishment. And then I suppose there last week or the week before, they were talking about the prayer at the beginning of the Dáil meetings. So there's that leading of prayer at the beginning of a meeting. There might be a prayer service, might be in the graveyard, times of prayer, and then pilgrimages. They're just some of the many opportunities. So with that in mind, we might look at, well, who can lead us in prayer? So we're very familiar with the priest as leader of prayer and as leader of the community. What we may not be as familiar with is the leader of prayer who's called or named by the community to lead prayer on behalf of the community. So it's somebody who's asked to lead us into prayer. It's someone who's appointed for a couple of years. They're not the leader of the community in the big sense like the priest is. They are the leader of the prayer of the community. And it has a very clear format. And when might somebody be asked to lead us into prayer? Now, there are many, many occasions, as we've noted, but these are just some of the ones that we might look at tonight. So there's Ash Wednesday, 2 days' time, that you might have a liturgy of the word with the distribution of ashes. And that's been very common over the years in the schools and in nursing homes or in care facilities. The Stations of the Cross, the Grow in Love prayer service, you might not be familiar with that. We'll talk about that in a minute. Times of praying for our dead. Then there's the Sunday Liturgy of the Word with a distribution or not of Holy Communion. And then there's funeral ministry. And I know Patricia will speak to funeral ministry. So maybe just to look at those different occasions. I'm going to start with the Stations of the Cross. So the Stations of the Cross are a prayer that is very familiar to us and very common as a way of being together in community, particularly during Lent and particularly on Good Friday. The prayer can be led by anybody in the community appointed to that position. So if the community gather and say, look, we'd love to have the Stations of the Cross every Friday, it's then to see who would be able to lead that prayer. Have we got a format for that prayer? And how will we do it? And there's two different versions that you might be familiar with. One is stational, where we move around. And then there's another, stational where we stay, and one where we move around. And depending on the group who are gathered, sometimes moving around is a great experience because you get that sense of the movement of the Stations of the Cross. At other times, depending on people's mobility, you might choose a stational model where we're stationary. And then again, where will you have it? You could have it in the church, or you could have outside Stations of the Cross. Or one of the times I remember praying it and it meaning an awful lot to me was in a park where we marked different churches for the trees for the stations. And there was a sense of this tree of life becoming the tree upon which Christ died and becoming the tree of life again in resurrection. So there's possibilities around where and how you might pray that. There is the Grow in Love, which is a school parish prayer service. So at all stages, the Grow in Love is trying to instill in children an awareness that they belong to a parish family, that the school family is one family, their own immediate family is another, but that they belong to the parish family and that all of the sacraments that they participate in, that they take part in those at a parish level. And the Grow in Love is done in such a way that there are many themes throughout the year. But each time they come to the end of a theme, perhaps, God forgives us, Jesus calls us to love one another, there's a prayer service. And that prayer service can take place either in the school or in the parish. It could be shared by maybe the teacher and somebody from the parish, communicating to the kids that actually faith happens at home, faith happens in the school, and it happens in parish, but also that we're called to pray as a community. And that's, as I've said, it can be led by either a leader of prayer or by the teacher. So I'm just realizing now that I've skipped the slide on the Ash Wednesday. Ash Wednesday is a lovely occasion to mark the beginning of Lent. And as we come to the beginning of Lent, I suppose the marking of ourselves with ashes is really a ritual to remind us of our own mortality, of our own fragility, and of our own, I suppose, challenge to be who we're called to be. So when we begin Lent, we mark ourselves with the mark of the cross, which reminds us that who we are called to be is more than maybe what we have been to date. We're aware of the ways that we've turned away from Christ. And Lent really invites us, turn again, start afresh, be renewed. So most of us may go to church on Ash Wednesday, may go to the local parish mass, and we will receive the ashes during mass. But there are people for whom that will not be possible. So in schools, in nursing homes, in care facilities, and maybe in a parish if it's not possible to have a mass on Ash Wednesday, it's possible to have a liturgy of the word and to give out the ashes. And some of you may be familiar that over the last couple of years, it may not just be the priest who has given you ashes on Ash Wednesday. It may be a minister who's been invited by the priest to participate in this. So we see that the way we pray together and the way we ritualize our faith, that some of the roles can be shared out among the community. As we look at prayers for our dead, it's a really important time for all of us because all of us know someone who's died, somebody we want to remember, and there are different moments in that journey. Initially, when somebody dies, they may be in hospital, they may be at home. There's a moment there for prayer, and there's a moment for there to be someone who will help us pray at that time. If you're the bereaved, if you've just lost a beloved, you may not feel able or kind of equipped to kind of start the prayer. But that's where there's the gift of somebody in your parish community, somebody in the locality who comes to the family home or comes to the hospital or comes to the care facility and supports the family in marking this moment. Because as we all know, that letting go of the body of our beloved is a very precious moment. And marking it with a time of prayer, aware that we are journeying, that Jesus journeys with us. We might listen to a line from the gospel of where Jesus cried at the death of his friend Lazarus. So there's that sense of just being supported and accompanied by the faith community, by the praying community, by our neighbours and friends. At the funeral home, so when we come to the funeral home, either at the beginning or maybe just before we go to the church, there might be a need for a moment of prayer. Again, it's that, how does the parish community support us and encourage us in these lonesome, difficult moments? And again, Bishop Bill used to say, at a time like that, it's the parish that ministers to those who are bereaved. So it's not expecting the family to be able to kind of trump up and kind of lead prayer at this raw and vulnerable time. It's for there to be a member of the parish community who's available to support them and to lead them into prayer. And it's praying in a way that's familiar to people. It might be leading the rosary, it might be other familiar prayers for people that encourages and supports them at a difficult time. For a moment, I'm going to skip the rest of the funeral and I'm going to move to when we're in the bereaved state, after we have buried somebody, a month later, 6 weeks later, 3 months later. There might be that time for the parish to have a parish remembrance prayer service. A lot of you would be familiar with them in November. Very often it's a mass for the dead. But there's no reason why there can't also be prayer services for the dead. It could be in the nursing home, again, it could be in the graveyard, it could be in the parish church, but just a time of remembering and ritualizing that separation between us and our loved ones and that entrusting of them to God. And then finally, I suppose in the local graveyard, Many of us visit the graveyard, pray for our own loved ones. We might pray for the neighbours, the ones we know, the ones maybe who are near the graves of our own loved ones. But there's a time too in the year for the parish maybe to gather in the local graveyards and to pray again into the future and now. It's not always possible to have a mass, but perhaps it is possible to have somebody lead a prayer service where we ritualize and remember our dead and I suppose encourage and support one another as those who have lost our beloveds. There's the Ash Wednesday that I mentioned to you. And it's a liturgy of the word with the distribution of ashes. And we'll talk a little bit further about that when we come to the Sunday liturgy. So we're going to come now to the Sunday liturgy. So many of you are aware that as there are fewer clergy, you will be maybe going to a different church on a Sunday or a Saturday night to celebrate Mass with the parishioners in your parish. But there are occasions when perhaps Father is not present. Perhaps Father is sick or has something has happened and there's been a little bit of confusion and maybe somebody was expected and somebody hasn't arrived, etc. So what is possible on a Sunday is the liturgy of the word with the distribution of communion. And that's to enable those who've gathered, even though the priest has not come, to offer praise and worship, which was our desire to be there anyway, and to be nourished by word and Holy Communion. And so the liturgy does not take the place of the Eucharist, but it's an option for praying in the event that the priest is not available to celebrate Mass. And just in terms of so the introductory rites are quite similar. The liturgy of the word is similar. Without a homily, there's a reflection on the word of God. Then there is the distribution of communion from the tabernacle. So it's not Mass. There is no liturgy of the Eucharist, but there is a sharing of Holy Communion. And then finally, we're sent to share the good news with others. And then finally, there's funeral ministries. And again, I suppose there's two elements we're going to look at, and Patricia will talk further to these. One is the reception of the body at the church, and the other is the prayer at the burial of the body. So as we bring our beloved to the church on the evening before the funeral mass, that can be led by a lay person who's appointed by the parish. And then the prayer at the burial ground or the prayer at the crematorium, that also can be led by a person. And there's very clear rites in that regard. So maybe just the final one is where to from here? So it's really for you as parish communities, as people in parishes, in parish councils, to reflect on what are the needs in our parish at this time, and how are we planning for the future in terms of how prayer will continue to be prayed? How will we continue to pray as a community in our locality over the coming years?
So we'll go on then to Patricia. Patricia, me and you will talk for a few minutes, and then we'll throw it open to the floor for anybody to come in and ask further questions. So Patricia, do you want to just tell us a small bit about yourself? Where are you from?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I'm living in the parish of Glenflesk. I'm from Cork City. We won't go there. So I'm kind of a quasi Kerry woman. And I'm in a group called the Legion of Mary in the parish. And so for years, I have done things like led Stations of the Cross, called to schools. I'm a sacristan and I go and look after the altar servers and train them. So I have a little bit of, yeah, won't call it experience, but I do it anyway if I'm asked to do it. And that's how I kind of fell into the funeral ministry as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in Glenflesk, that you're part of a group of lay people that take responsibility for leadership
Yeah.
in prayer, just as Francis described earlier. So
Yeah.
do you want to take us through that, like maybe starting with what do you do now, and then we can go back and look at how did it all start and.
All right, what we're doing at the moment in Glenflesk, we have three churches in Glenflesk. So we started in the main parish church, where I am the sacristan, and what we did was we received the remains. Now, I would say I suppose I could say I did it the first time, because Father Jim Lennon, our parish priest, asked me if I would do it. And I don't know whether I did it good or bad, but anyway, I tried to follow what he had. And there's housekeeping be done beforehand, because you have to prepare the church as you would for a funeral mass, in the sense of having the Paschal candle and having the pall ready and having the cross and the Bible and all those items ready as well, because that's all part of the ceremony. And so I was used to doing that. So that part was easy. And the next part then was to go to the door with the holy water. And I have done that as well, but I've I've only held the holy water for the priest. And we have a cordless microphone then, and Father Jim had outlined on the first occasion what prayers I could say from what I call the blue book, the funeral book that you
Okay.
use.
So you have an actual text that you're able to follow.
Yeah.
And
And since
instead of the
then, he has
priest.
given me he's given us a kind of a printed card, if you know what I mean,
Yeah.
like just
Yeah.
laminated card. He's picked out what we can do. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so how long are you at that now?
Tis 2 years, I suppose. Yeah.
2 years.
Almost 2 years. Yeah. Just a
Okay.
little over 2 years. Yeah. It was Christmas. Yeah. 2 years ago. Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
it's just for receiving the remains into the church at the
Yeah.
minute. Is that
Yeah.
right?
That's it. And it kind of happened prior to that. It had only been, after COVID, it was only before Mass that the remains was received. And in this particular case, the gentleman had died in a fire, and it was a very traumatic for the parish, for
Mm.
the whole parish. And they had asked if they could bring him to the church the night before. And I suppose Father Jim was a little bit reluctant, because he knows that you're trying to move in this direction of being lay led. And I suppose he didn't want to sort of upset it in any way. And so then he asked me, and I said, I will. And that's how it started. And from there, then he invited more to join. So 3 more volunteered in what was St. Agatha's parish church, and in the other 2 churches, the 2 sacristans in those 2 churches agreed as well to receive the remains. So since then, we have been, where it is requested, we have done it.
Okay. And how have you been received, Patricia, would you say? Like how
Wonderfully, I felt anyway. That very first night, obviously, I didn't think about it too much, because
Mm.
I don't see any point in being nervous about it. Just do it.
Mm.
It was very sad. I knew it was going to be kind of a sad funeral.
Mm.
So I just, I did my best. And afterwards I did ask a few people, and I knew the family were happy because they came and thanked me, which could be just politeness. But a lot of other people, um, just the general parishioners came up as well and said they were delighted to see, and I suppose they all knew me as well, which was fine.
Yeah.
And, that made it easier. And they
Mm.
had seen me doing other things, so I suppose they didn't think it was all that different. And they just want to know, was Father Jim away? And I just said, no, this is the new way now, that if you
Yeah.
want the remains brought into the church, that the lay people will do it. So,
We'll do
and I
it.
said, if you want to do it, just give me your name and phone number, and I'll give it to Father Jim. Do you know what I mean? So,
Okay. And
yeah.
some of the other lay people doing it are not sacristans.
Yes, there was three. Father Jim put out a kind of how would you say? He put out the law for helpers,
Yeah.
and 3 people, he did a little form for helpers in all the different areas in the church, and 3 people signed up for funeral ministry, and it happened that they were all in St. Agatha's, so like that was a good bit ago, and there was no training, so I just said to Father Jim, you know, they'll go off the boil if you don't do something, so um. So I started just taking them one at a time to come with me and just see what I was
Mm.
doing, whether it was right or wrong, but doing it the best we could. And, so, and then as a result, then that they could do it together. And I just found that 2 is great, having another person. Now they're all gentlemen, 2 of them are younger, a lot younger than me, and one would be maybe the same age. And so I think that's great as well. You know what I mean? That there's younger men, as it turns out. And since then, we have another lady now who has put her hand up as well. So, yeah.
Okay.
So it'll
So
be fun.
you're an expanding group.
Yeah, yeah. So
Okay,
hopefully.
okay. And where's this heading, would you say, Patricia? What's your read of it?
What do you mean?
Well, like, will it stay as is, or do you see it expanding? Like, is there scope for?
No, I think there will be expansion. Father Jim is happy to take maybe one at a time to a home. I suppose he'll know, whether it's an easy funeral, whether it is an elderly person or whether it's more tragic, and maybe it might require just the priest on his own, but he has, and he is anxious for us to come to the graveyard as well and to help with leading of the prayer there.
Okay,
And I think that would be wonderful as well,
okay,
Yeah.
okay. Because it strikes me, Patricia, and I'm just very conscious this weekend now there was a huge funeral in the parish, and lay people organized everything, like from the road signs to the controlling traffic to the gathering in the home, the whole lot except the prayer.
Yeah.
But now you're moving on into
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Some people are shy about public prayer, but once
Mm.
they start, you see, and that's why the two is so wonderful, I think, because again, now the gentleman, like when we had to say the Decade of the Rosary, they were a little bit shy. Maybe they wouldn't be able to count all the Hail Marys or whatever.
Yeah,
And, like just to sort of get it right. And, but it sort of evolved then, like, and they've got comfortable with everything now.
yeah.
So, yeah, so it's great. Yeah.
All right, all right. Patricia, is there anything else you want to say about that now before we open it up to the folk?
No, I
You've,
think
you've
that's
covered you've
probably enough.
covered you've
Yeah.
covered the
Yeah.
ground. So basically, you as sacristan were initially invited by the priest to
Yeah.
lead the reception, and you were given a script to work with,
Yeah.
and you were well received, and
Yeah.
that encouraged the priest to invite a wider group to take on that role. And it sounds like there's 5 of you in the parish. 5 lay people in the parish who are now leading prayers
There's
around.
5 just in the parish church, and then in the other 2 churches, each of the sacristans is doing it. So there
Okay.
is 7, and there is another lady who came as well to another meeting that we had recently with Francis. So you could say there's 8 of us really.
Eight.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay.
investigating. Yeah.
Okay.
Hi there, Martin. Hi, Patricia. I'm in Kenmare, Patricia. I'll be down to see you sometime. Sounds like you're getting on really well. I suppose my question, or not a question really, but another aspect of all of this is that preparing the parish for the advent of the lay parishioners, because it isn't really being discussed in to prepare people to have lay people lead prayer. I think that hasn't really been addressed very much in our parishes where I am anyway. So that when the day dawns, people are not surprised or there's some, they know it's coming, and they're happy enough with whoever is available or whoever has been appointed to lead in certain circumstances. But at the moment, it is an alien concept. I don't think people are ready for it. Well, they probably wouldn't be accepting of it, but I think it needs a little bit of forward planning and just a little bit of preparation.
There wasn't much talk about it in our parish either before I was landed at the door, but the family had been made known by Father Jim that this was the way in which, if they wanted the remains to come in, this was, that the sacristan would do it, and were they happy with that? And they were. And so I think it's the fact that maybe people knew who I was, even though it's a big parish and there's a lot of people. People know me, and I'm not alien to them. I wasn't sort of, who is she, like, they knew who I was, you know what I mean? And at the time I had my hand in the cast, so I had to I had to put the holy water on the table, and then my husband was holding the microphone for me, and things like that. So it was a bit cobbled, but they know him as well. So it was grand, you know what I mean? And at funeral, I'm always at the funeral masses, and my husband does the tourable, so he's always in, lighting, bringing out the smoke, as it were. So people were familiar with us, and I think that was,
That was,
that was
yeah,
good,
okay.
a good way to start. And it just happens that's how it is,
Just saying, like they weren't trained in any way, and were they all sacristans? Or like she said, some men came in, were they sacristans or just people that just put their names forward?
No,
To
they weren't
do this?
sacristan. At the
No.
start, I was the only sacristan, and then the other two, rocked up when they realized,
Yeah.
they came to have a look. And
Yeah.
then the three men weren't, no. But I have
Yeah.
trained them. They know where things are in the sacristy. I've shown them where everything is. And I've
So
shown,
you trained them, you trained them, Patricia. Was that basically,
yes,
Yeah.
I've trained them.
so it's a kind of a hands-on practical
For good,
training?
yes. I'm a kind of I have made a kind of a step list, if you know what I mean. I'm a kind of a lister, so
Yeah.
they know they've number one, get the key in the shop. Number two, open the big doors. Do you know what I mean? This is how I do it. And then I show them where everything is. I show them where the pall is and where the table, where the white cloth is, all this kind of thing, the practical things. And then
Yeah.
finally, how to use the microphone, how to turn it on, how to turn on the lights, just all the basic things. And I have it all
Yeah.
listed out, and it just makes life a bit easier. And they seem to be happy enough, and they will soon be getting their maiden voyage because I actually have to go for an operation. So if there's a funeral after this, the three of them will have to muck away together, and I'm
They
sure
might have to
it'll
manage
be
themselves.
fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah.
and they won't
Yeah.
want anymore.
Yeah, I suppose I'm listening to Patricia, and well done, Patricia. But I'll go back to Mary's question in relation to the leading of prayer. And I look at Father Jim introduced Patricia to the family and sort of cleared it with them in advance, and they were very happy with that, and that's great. And I'm so pleased that there was an introduction, that it just didn't happen, and she had the buy-in from the family, because okay, at funerals it's a very sensitive time, and it's important to have that buy-in. But in terms of prayer and what Mary was saying, I think the same type of an introduction has to be also made as well in some format, that someday that somebody just gets up and leads prayer, be it on a Sunday, that's not priest led. I think this is what we're concerned about, that there would be almost an authority given to say whoever is going to do it, that this will be happening, and so be prepared for it. So just as to be sensitive to the people when it does happen.
I think we've got two great examples there. So I think what was wonderful about the example in Glenflesk is there was a need. Father Jim saw and recognised that there was a need for the removal. He wasn't going to be available to it, and he allowed somebody. And in fairness to Patricia, Patricia has a background in leading prayer through the Legion of Mary and different things. So I think she wasn't a complete novice, and I suppose it was also the fact that people knew her. But I think what Mary and Dermot are referring to there, which I think is very important, is, yeah, I suppose it's not about kind of a family coming up to the church and then suddenly getting a land that there is no father to receive the remains, and suddenly it's Dermot or Mary or whoever. I think that would be very unfair, and as you say, particularly at a sensitive time like that. So I think there's a few things that strike me. One is getting people on board with realizing that this is where we are going to be, that actually either we will lead prayer and have lay people leading some of our prayer as communities, or we will pray in community less often, because there are only so many priests who can lead prayer. So there's that limitation. And I think it's people getting used to the idea, but I think it's also recognizing that, there are other circumstances, and you gave it a fabulous example there, Martin, where the community rallied round at the time of a difficult funeral, and the community were well able to hold everything, but for some reason they were maybe a little bit wary or didn't think they were able to do the prayer. So it is people gaining confidence and gaining strength. And I loved Patricia's idea of the two of them working together. So it's like getting into the habit now of working alongside the local priest in leading prayer, so that the moment comes when you're leading it with another lay person, people see it as a seamless transition rather than a huge big shock. So it's getting us used to both things, I think.
Okay, thanks, Francis. So that was an example, say, from Glenflesk of an introduction of lay-led prayer at a funeral time, and an introduction that was well received. Now, Francis earlier on spoke about, that could be part of, a wider development in the prayer life of the parish. I'm just wondering, is there any comment on that, even with Sunday liturgy, that it could be lay-led if a priest is suddenly indisposed?
Can I just go back to the last question? Just 1 second. I think what my understanding from what Dermot and Mary was saying is that there needs to be, it's not like advertising, but spoken more of to the parishioners in the parish, that this is the future of the church. I know in our parish councils, and us, I'll be a sacristan as well, I'm aware of where we're going in the future, but our actual parishioners aren't, if that makes sense. And it's how do we get it out there? It was fine with Patricia because Father Jim actually spoke to her and asked her and invited her to do this. But for all the parishioners to be aware that this is coming, and actually in the very near future, not in, further away. That's all I wanted to say.
Okay, and Marie, thanks very much indeed. And that can either be done by the bishop or it could be done at local level by the priest, but somebody needs to signal that this is the direction.
Just a quick question. I would very much appreciate if we could have a copy of Patricia's to-do list. I'm a great believer in this, step 1, go open the key, step 2, close the door, step 3, turn on the heating, etc., etc. And it would make life very easy for somebody that's thinking of doing it. Because again, in the parish where I come from, we have 3 churches and we have no resident priest, but we have a very young, dynamic, energetic priest. But unfortunately, the poor man can't, hasn't got wings and he can't fly from A to B to C all the time. So I suppose this is something that's coming down the road. So a to-do list from Patricia would be great. We could read up in our own time and to kind of familiarise with the routine of what was to do. And secondly, what Dermot and Mary Henderson said as well, to have the parish be aware of this is what's happening, rather than somebody's father's dead and all of a sudden, Jesus, what's she doing up in the altar? Father Shaw isn't there at all. Like what's after happening. So you don't want that sort of reaction. So, to make it aware, and it's the same for all the other ministries of, we'll say, ministers of the ward or baptisms or whatever that people are doing, that, if the congregation could be made aware of that, it would be great if this was ongoing in the parish. Just thought those things. Thank you.
Just a comment there when you said about the Sunday literature and Holy Communion. When has the rule changed? Because I know I asked the bishop while we were doing the course, and he said, no, you can't give out Holy Communion at Sunday liturgy.
In exceptional circumstances. So, for example, tonight, Saturday evening, the priest gets sick and he knows he's not going to be able to make Mass in your church on Sunday morning, and there isn't another priest available. And so there's a way of celebrating the liturgy of the word for Sunday with the distribution of Holy Communion. But it is an exceptional, it's not a kind of, instead of Mass, we'll have this. It's when Mass is not available because there has been an illness or an accident or something like that on a Sunday. Being appointed by the parish, so it's not that somebody just gets up one morning and says, you know what, I'll decide to do this. The person who leads prayer always does it on behalf of the parish. So then you need to kind of, I suppose, have this conversation at pastoral council level, who might lead prayer in your parish. And I would suggest, as Patricia mentioned there, that she spoke about 2 people. Having 2 people to lead prayer together is just makes everything more comfortable, because there's always practical things that need to be done, like turning on the lights and the heating and keeping an eye to the microphones and all the rest, and that somebody else can kind of concentrate on the praying. And vice versa. So it's really, really helpful. No more than tonight, Martin, you're facilitating this, and some of the rest of us are giving our little input. So it's always helpful to have another person. So maybe it's for parishes to think about, okay, in the event that you do want to have people leading prayer in your locality, have you begun to think about having teams of people who would be available for different forms of prayer? Because I suppose it's not necessarily just the funeral. It's not necessarily just on that exception on a Sunday or a Saturday evening. It might also be making that connection with the local school. It might be connecting with the local nursing or care facility. So there's lots of opportunities. So maybe as pastoral councils, are you thinking about who might be available to lead prayer any given day?
It was very clear from the mapping exercise that the example that Patricia shared with us, there's loads and loads of examples across the diocese. There's loads and loads of things going on in parishes like that, and it's great. And I appreciate very much Patricia's willingness to come on and share the story. Like, a story is 1,000 times better than a good idea, because it gives us a real sense. Look, it's already happening there, and it can happen here as well.